Some time ago, FiiO announced that they've started up a new subsidiary which is focused on selling more affordable audio products. Among some of their first products was the EA3. Now, it's not as though FiiO does not already make some affordable IEM products. So what can we expect from an even more affordable product from the JadeAudio sister brand? Seeing as JadeAudio is a subsidiary of FiiO, it's not very surprising to see how much the design of the EA3 has in common with another IEM produced by FiiO. Between the EA3 and FH1S, they share a seemingly identical design, albeit just with different color variants for each brand and slight differences in the materials used. The housing is made out of acrylic, which doesn't look or feel a great deal different to FiiO's more expensive offerings such as the FA7. On the faceplate, we've got something rather unique, as it is created with multiple layers of celluloid, a design which was apparently inspired by guitar picks. The result is that the pattern produced on each faceplate is totally unique. It's quite interesting to see how subtle these patterns can look in certain light and angles, and at other times at just the right angle, it suddenly just gets this really dynamic depth. As far as comfort is concerned, FiiO really have nailed the design for a universal shape, and I'm very glad to see that they've carried this over into the more affordable EA3 as well. Internally, the EA3 houses a 13.6mm dynamic driver, and this is accompanied by a Knowles 33518 balanced armature. The silver-plated copper cable is also pretty nice, although it is a little on the thinner side, and it doesn't feel as premium as the thicker all-copper cable which comes with the FH1S. So overall, I think they've done a great job with the design of the EA3, as it looks and feels like a refined product. It's comfortable, it sits securely in the ear, and even sports a little bit of a uniqueness for each of those faceplates. But of course, the design is only half the story. How does the EA3 sound? It comes with two different sets of silicone ear tips, a set of dark grey tips and a set of grey tips with red stems. As per usual, I attempted to measure the response with each of them, but for some reason the dark grey tips gave me some very unreliable measurements, as I found it impossible to get even just some reasonably consistent measurements with them. But anyways, let's take a look at the ones with the red stem before we move on to some third-party ear tips. As we can see, the overall response is pretty much your classic V-shaped signature. Most of the bass energy is focused in the lower and sub-bass region, and things remain relatively consistent to within 10 decibels between around 700 Hz and the high mids, before rising rather sharply again in the upper treble regions. What this results in is a perceived signature which seems to be reasonably well balanced, as the treble peak tends to complement the bass to some degree, but on most tracks I found this treble to just be a bit too present. It does a great job of bringing out very subtle nuances and sparkles from instruments such as cymbals, but it just overdoes it to the point of sounding artificial and sometimes metallic. Switching to certain aftermarket tips can change things up, but they can also accentuate the problems even further. First up are some foam tips. These tips are not strictly aftermarket, as they are the standard ones which came with the new FH1S, but are not included with the EA3. As we can see, these tips do have a noticeable effect on the signature. Overall, it tends to make the signature almost a bit more V-shaped, as it increases the bass whilst also shifting that treble peak a bit earlier and elevating the roughly 4 kHz peak by about 2 decibels or so. The spin fit tips, on the other hand, alters the response rather drastically. These do tame the bass nicely, but in exchange we're getting a bump in that 1 to 3 kHz region and another substantial increase to that peak in the upper treble. What's interesting is that fast and narrow dip at 4 kHz. This is not something I could pinpoint when listening to the A3 with these tips, but that dip showed up repeatedly and consistently with both the spin fit tips and the spiral dot tips, irrespective of how many times I did the measurements. Generally speaking, the JVC spiral dot tips are usually my favorite tips to use with IEMs, and in this case I found that to be true again. With these tips, the EA3 still had a nice sub-bass kick, but the signature felt overall less warm due to some decrease in the bass and mid-range. The upper mids and treble is where we can both see and hear the biggest change, and in my opinion what felt like the most balanced signature. The sub-bass peak, 2 kHz peak and the upper treble peak are all at approximately the same level, unlike the measurements with other tips which tend to be a bit more uneven. Okay, so finally I think we should do a little comparison to the now famous and often considered budget king, the blonde BL03. As we can see, the BL03 and the EA3 actually have a number of similarities in their respective signatures. The BL03 is definitely the more bass dominant, but it's also got a considerably smoother signature overall. This may very well be largely due to the fact that the EA3 has a total of 2 drivers, whereas the BL03 makes do with just a single dynamic driver. For me personally, I think it might be that 1.5 to 2 kHz peak which is predominantly responsible for making the EA3 sound a bit harsher in comparison to the BL03, because those upper treble peaks occur at pretty much the same spot and at the same level. The other thing I've started to notice is that I would often tend to increase the volume in order to compensate for a lack of bass. Not that the EA3 lacks bass, but this would of course also increase the volume of everything else, and that makes the peaks in the mid-range and treble more prominent. So between these two, I'd pick the blonde. But if we could get the blonde's sound with the design, fit and comfort of the EA3, that would be an absolute runaway success. As far as the value is concerned, I think the EA3 brings a fairly decent amount of value to the table. Whilst the sound signature might not be quite to my taste, and it does lack a bit of refinement, it can at least be reasonably well balanced with the right tips. For the price, I think this is perfectly acceptable, but nothing to really write home about. This becomes especially apparent when we compare the EA3 to that other $40 gem, the blonde BL03. As shown by the response graphs, the BL03 actually has a bit more bass. However, what makes the BL03 more pleasing to listen to, at least in part, is possibly the slightly better controlled treble region and less forward mids. It just sounds overall more natural and lacks that almost metallic sounding characteristic that I'm hearing from the EA3. If even just this single aspect of the signature was addressed, I think the value of the EA3 would increase substantially. However, having said that, where the EA3 does gain some major points is in the build quality. There are numerous IEMs out there which cost quite a lot more than $40, but offer zero improvement in the build quality or comfort department, and in some cases are actually considerably worse. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Dunu DK3001. But again, at $40, I think what we get here is fairly acceptable, and I look forward to seeing what else is to come from this brand. Well, that's it for this review. Thank you so much for watching. Any questions or comments, leave them down below. That's all from me for now, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.